My name is Paul Molloy, and I am the Executive Director of the Corliss Institute here in Warren, Rhode Island. We are an agency that serves deaf adults with developmental disability. Some of our adults are deaf-blind with developmental disability. We have group homes, apartments, and day program where we do training to help with independent living for these individuals so that they can reach their maximum capacity. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about myself. As I said, my name is Paul Molloy. I am the executive director. I am married to a wonderful deaf woman, and I also have two beautiful daughters. One is studying to be an interpreter, and the other one is studying to be an art curator in New York City. Period. Anyway, I have Usher syndrome. I was born deaf and sighted, and I was losing my vision as I aged. One of the things is until recently, I got 2 cochlear implants, and I am completely blind now. So technically, I was born a deaf-sighted man. Now I'm a blind, hard of hearing man. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you that is so that I want you to be aware that I've been through it all with doctors as a deaf person with low vision, as a blind person with low hearing, as you might want to say. I want to applaud all of you for taking the time to watch this video because I do hope it will help you. Let me start off with environment. Environment is the most overlooked thing in doctor's office, waiting rooms, and stuff. And when I'm talking environment, I'm not just talking about placements of chairs or tables or water coolers. I'm also talking about noise level. If you have an individual who is a patient of yours, and they're hard of hearing, and they use auditory listening devices, you need to be aware of the environmental sound around you, such as radios playing in the background, many people chatting at the same time. Unfortunately, with hearing aids and cochlea, we cannot drown out specific sound. So in other words, whatever noise is going on is going right into the individual's head. And oftentimes that makes it very difficult for the individual to be able to understand what's going on, especially if they're trying to do things auditory without an interpreter. And sadly, in many cases, people who are hard of hearing do tend to not use an interpreter for many different factors. So it's always important to think about what's going on noise-wise. For example, I've been in a doctor's office and the curtains are very flimsy or the walls are very thin, and so many people are talking out in the hallway and talking in the room, and it's like I can't separate the sound. So that's something you should always try to think about, how much noise is actually being played out. For example, if you're listening to a radio and you're working and the telephone rings, you can drown out the radio, providing you're hearing. But if you're hard of hearing and use hearing aids or cochlea, it's impossible to drain out the radio and hear the person on the phone. It's a very difficult task for someone like myself. So that's one thing. That's the auditory part. Let me talk about the visual part. One of the important things to think about is the visual. If you know you have an individual that's either legally blind or blind, that's like a straight path from the doorway to the reception desk or whatever, so that they're not having to maneuver around chairs or low tables, because as you know, with Usher syndrome and retinitis pigmentosa, your field decreases as you age. So someone might not see the table when it's low, and they might bump into a trip or hurt themselves. So that's something to be very aware of. One of the things is also many doctors' office have white walls and white floors, and that takes away the 3D effect, meaning that when I had vision, when I was legally blind, if I was in a completely white doctor's office, I could not tell where the corner of the walls are, where the north wall met the west wall. So one of the things I always recommended in the past was what I like to call 3Ding the room. And what I mean by that is where you have molding and the floor molding and the moldings around the doors is to maybe paint them a different color. Like in my office, I have white walls, but I have dark gray molding that goes all around so that I will always be able to tell where the floor ends and the wall begins or where the door is. The door, that's a big thing. Many times when the patient is in the doctor's office, the nurse brings them in, takes the blood pressure, takes the vitals, and then they say the doctor will be in soon. Now, if the room is all white, it'll be very hard for that individual to find the door in case of an emergency. So one of the things I always try to emphasize with doctor's office classrooms is for people to make their door very colorful. Put healthy posters on your door so that they can see the contrast. Contrast is very important for someone with a visual impairment. RP is the leading cause of blindness. Ulcer syndrome, these are very high. There's a high number of people who have this. So you need to think about things with the contrast, light versus dark, dark versus light stuff. And the rooms, sometimes doctor's office rooms are very, very bright. And it makes it very difficult for an individual with visual impairment to see. I'm relating more with RP and ushers because that's what I have. Oftentimes we reach a stage where it becomes what they call whiteout, where we can no longer see like a white piece of paper with a black pen writing on it. We need the paper to be black and the writing to be white. And that's called whiteout because what happens is the white kind of just becomes like a haze and a fog, and it disorientates you. And it makes it, when brightness defeats the darkness, it makes it harder to see something. So, like my computer, everything is all in reverse colors so that I can see. And rhyming with that. And it's also to think, when you're in the room, is there a loud air conditioner going on? Is there outside noise? And always, one of the advice I always give them is because depending on the vision, they don't know if you're talking to them or to the nurse or somebody. Always say their name first. Okay, Paul, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Da 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 da. Okay, hold on a minute, Paul. I'm going to talk to my nurse. Give them environmental feedback. That's so important because half of the time, even now, I'm an educated man. I run an agency, but there's times I'm sitting in a doctor's office and too many people are talking and I have no idea what's going on. And it's just very important to identify who you are, identify what you're going to do before you do it. And it's very important to always be within focus of the individual. Try not to, like if you have the individual sitting in a low chair, sit in a stool. You want to try to keep their eye level even. Because what happens is if somebody with ulcers or RP is looking upward at you, the bright lights above your head is going to be a glare and pose difficulty. So it's really important with that to think about the environment, think about everything around you, how you can 3D, put contrast. If you have white cabinets, maybe have a darker countertop. And that's really important to realize. Don't be afraid to ask, can I give you assistance? Don't just assume you're supposed to give assistance. Ask. Some people will accept it. Some people say no, they're fine, and that's okay. But it's not a terrible thing to ask. Don't just do it. That's important. Also, when guiding and working with a person, ask them, how can I help you? You know, can you hear me? Can I change the radio? Can I lower something? Is this a good enough room for you? Also, give them environmental feedback. Like when I go into my doctor's office, now I've been there a lot. My nurse who works with me, her name is Nellie, she'll come up to me and she'll tap me and say, come with me. And I will grab her arm and we go in and she'll say, okay, you're in room 3. Remember, the examining table is on your right. The scale is on your left in the corner. Chair is right across. She gives me that feedback so that this way, if I'm sitting on the examining table and I get uncomfortable and I want to sit in a chair, I can now get up and sit in a chair. Whereas if somebody doesn't give me any feedback, I can't sit in the chair. I'm stuck with where I am. Oh, I know that goes a little above and beyond the duty, but I also feel that we need to make sure we're giving the individual maximum input, visually, auditorily. I tell my doctors, because I don't mind, I say, all right, you know what? If I don't hear you and something, just tap my knee, tap my elbow. I don't have a problem with that. So it's really good to have a report with the individual because then things can be smoother. Another big issue is, when you say, okay, I need you to fill out all these information when they arrive at the reception desk. Someone like myself, I can't read the information, so I would have to have someone repeat it to me. But that kind of bothers me because I don't want to be saying my private information out loud in a waiting room. So one of the things I've always requested was for that when I make an appointment with a new doctor, I explain to them, can they send me the forms in advance so that I can use it on a special device called the CCTV, or I can scan it into my computer and use my JAWS, which is a voice app that allows me to listen to what's on the page and I can answer it. Remember, the person with the disability is the patient, not the person who brought them in. And the reason I say that is oftentimes I go, and if I don't have my guide dog with me, I will have an assistant with me. And people will talk to my assistant and say, by the way, can he tie his shoe? Can he do this? We need him to get this. We need to ask him if he had COVID, and we need to ask. And it's like, I'm right here. You can talk to me. And even after you tell them that, people tend to treat myself, and I'll say this from experience, as a third-rate person. And it's like, and my assistant is very good. And he'll say, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm just his eyes. Everything else he answers. I just point him in the right direction. So it's very important to really establish a communication that works for both of you. My wife is a lip reader. My wife is deaf, but she prefers to read lips when she's in a doctor's office because she likes her privacy. So her and her doctor has set up a system where they sit very far apart. The doctor puts on a clear shield and they talk and they get all the questions and stuff answered. And then the doctor takes off the shield and puts a mask back up and then goes over and works with my wife. I mean, there's a lot of creative ways to do things. If nothing is in black and white, it's very individualized. So if you're working with someone like me, and then you have another patient that is similar disability levels as me, they might have totally different things that they prefer. So it's really, really important to, if you know you're taking on a patient with a disability, is to really communicate with them right away and find out what works best for them and what you can do to accommodate them. You know, some of the requests might be out of this world. You basically just say, no, can't do that. So it's just uh, remember the person who's an individual. Okay, I also want to talk about interpreting. Uh, and this is a tricky and sticky issue. Shouldn't say feeling, but issue. Oftentimes, if there's an interpreter in the room, the doctor or the nurse will talk directly to the interpreter. That's a no-no, because then that again is making an individual feel like they're third rate. And so it's very important that the doctor, while communicating with the patient, should basically almost ignore the interpreter and just talk to the individual, and the interpreter will answer and stuff like that. But it's also important, again, as I said in the beginning, to have communication, because what happens is if you're using a general stage interpreter, which means the person's vision is still pretty good, the interpreter can be behind you and be signing and stuff, and there's no problem. But then what happens is, as your deterioration of your eyes, you might have to get an up close interpreter. And so that's where it becomes tricky, because then the interpreter's got to almost be right in that patient's field so that they can see the signs and stuff. Like, for example, for the longest time, people had to sign just like this for me to understand them when I could see, because my field was so small. So what happens is the interpreter will be right in front of me, signing like this, and then the doctor would say, I need to ask him this, 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 this. And the interpreter would do it. And then I would answer the interpreter, or I would voice to the doctor. Then the interpreter would have to step away, and the doctor will come in and do the physical touching or whatever he or she needs to do. So because of that, it's also a good idea that if you know you have a deaf individual that needs an interpreter, whether it's just general interpreter, an up close interpreter, a tracking interpreter, which I'll explain in a second, or tactile interpreting, it's a very good idea to make sure you add time to their appointment. I know many doctors have it like every half hour or whatever their schedule is, but when you know you're working with someone that's going to need an interpreter, it's very important to add time. So that this way, because communication is going to take longer. Another type of interpreting that people use when they're visually impaired is called tracking. And that's where the individual needs to hold on to the forearm, right? And while the interpreter is signing. Again, this is something that where the interpreter has to get between the doctor and the patient, and then got to step apart, move back together. So again, time is very important. And then the last one is tactile. And this is an interesting one now, is when someone like myself, if I'm communicating with someone who's deaf, I use what's called tactile. He or she signs in my hand, and then I either sign generally to them, or I tactfully back to them if they're deafblind also. This, you have to remember, is a very slow process versus, just communicating back and forth. So again, time is very essential, so that they can make sure there's plenty of time so that the individual patient has time to ask you their question. Oftentimes, doctors will say, okay, we're done, everything good, and they leave. And it's like, I didn't get a chance to ask certain questions. Oh, just send me an email. So again, I want to be treated like a human being. I'm the same as anybody else. I work, I pay my taxes, I pay my house bills, I pay my kids' college tuition, so there's no reason why I should be treated different just because I have a disability. So it's really important to see the human first. I can't stress that enough. I know doctors are very busy. I know time is essential. I know the insurance company is a brat, and I understand that. But there's also a thing about human dignity, um, and it's really important. And like even now we have the COVID. So what's happening is people are wearing gloves, which makes it even more harder for the tactile signing. Um, Sometimes if I'm working with someone who is deaf and I can't, my wife will tactile with me because then I don't need to put the gloves on. But the thing is, so you need to think about those because time, again, this is time. So, I mean, I can't stress it enough that you need to ask questions. You know, we have lots of questions, and you have to remember when we don't get all the auditory or the visual feedback that you're getting. How many times I've heard a doctor says, "Well, as you can see from the X-ray right here," and it's like, no, I can't. So it's important to realize that you have to think outside the box sometimes. And like I said, the best thing you could do is say, what's the best way for me to describe this? Or what can I do for this or that or this or that? Just remember, individual first, patient first, interpreter second, aides third. It's really important to just focus on them. I think that's about it.